Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Ermi Desai, editor of Move Smartly, and it is time for our monthly show, The Situation. Every month, our lead contributor, John Pasalis, president of Realosophy Realty and lead contributor here at Move Smartly, takes your precise questions on your various real estate dilemmas and that you're experiencing in the real estate market across the Toronto area. Are you ready, John?
Ready to roll. Thank you again for everyone for submitting their questions. And, when we hear from everyone, I know a lot of people, a lot of our viewers, get a lot of value, even just hearing other people's situations because they find a bit of their own story or their own circumstances in many of these questions. So thank you, everyone, for submitting them. Of course, we've anonymized the names, so no one knows the details. But again, thank you for all these emails that we get every month.
Yes, much appreciated. Keep it coming at askjohn@movesmartly.com. So let's get started. Question 1 today. Hi, John. I saw your show on YouTube and loved it and got very helpful information. John, I need advice about my purchase. Here is my situation. We purchased a home directly from a builder in London, Ontario in March 2022 without an agent. While I have paid my $150,000 deposit on time, the builder is now denying inclusion of significant features that were shown in the floor plan, saying that they were not included in the spec sheet. But the agreement of purchase and sale, APS, does not say that the floor plan is for illustration purposes only. Also, the same APS included European windows, but now the builder is saying those windows won't be provided to us due to supply issues, and they are not offering us any compensation for this. The builder is also denying my request to visit the house because it is apparently under construction and not safe to view, even though our APS again says that we can visit the house even before the final pre-delivery inspection. Another big concern I have is that the builder is also selling similar houses now for much lower prices on the same street. And I'm worried that the bank appraisal for my mortgage will come in lower than what I paid for it as a result. So I have a few questions because I'm very worried. Like, has the APS been breached? Can I cancel the purchase and get my deposit back? What would be my best course of action given these issues? Regards, Sumit.
Wow.
I feel for for Sumit here.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of questions, a lot of details. So thank you for the email. I'm going to try to kind of break it down into three broader issues. I mean, we started with questions about the builder effectively making changes to the home or doing things that were not originally in the agreement. So that's the first issue. The second, I believe, was the concern about being able to view the home before completion. And then the last, of course, was that the builder's selling, below prices that he paid for, and the appraisal might come in lower. So those are all very different issues. I'll try to unpack them. I'll start by saying, of course, that I don't have their agreement of purchase and sale, so I cannot speak specifically to it. The reality is, that most of the answers you can get by basically just talking to your lawyer, and your lawyer generally in this situation should be able to answer all of these questions. But I'll speak more generally from my experience, just based on typical agreements and pre-construction agreements. Now, the first, situation or issue that came up about the builder making changes to the property, making changes to the finishes or some of the finished products, that is quite normal, I would say. In a lot of agreements of purchase and sale, the builder does have flexibility in changing the layout slightly. If we think about, even the issues tend to be even bigger with pre-construction condos, because they can be material changes. Like, you at one point have like this big open living room floor plan, and then on completion they decided to put like a structural column right in the middle of it, right? Because whatever, they changed the design of the building and needed to do that. Well, it doesn't matter if the column was not in the floor plan. The fact is, usually they can make those types of changes or remove a closet sometimes if they need to, because of something to do with the building construction. So it is quite typical that the builders do have flexibility in making changes to the obviously not huge ones. You can't buy they can't deliver a completely different floor plan. But they do have some flexibility in making changes. And especially, even when it comes to the finishes, I think they mentioned a certain type of window was promised, but another one was delivered. Again, they usually have that type of flexibility based on based on supply constraints and challenges with building construction. And normally you don't get any remedy from the builder. Like that's just, quite typically the agreements are written usually in a way that significantly favors the builder. So you usually don't get money back. Now, again, if I was a buyer and I'm in this situation, I would ask my lawyer to confirm this. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe there's some room to negotiate something, but usually you don't have a lot of flexibility as a buyer.
And just to clarify, would Summit already be in touch with the real estate lawyer at this point?
Well, I would hope.
Normally, when you buy a pre-construction and you've only paid the deposit, you haven't done the closing yet?
Well, yeah, you should have. Like when you buy pre-construction, you should basically get your lawyer to review the agreement of purchase and sale before you sign a firm agreement of purchase and sale, like especially for new construction. With condominiums, there's a cooling off period, so you have 10 days to get your lawyer to review it. Low-rise homes don't have a cooling off period in Toronto. So normally you would want to, if you're going to the builder's office, sign an agreement, you would want a condition that says, the agreement is conditional on the buyer's lawyer reviewing the contract. And then the buyer lawyer would review it and really look for issues that kind of might lead to problems for the buyer's perspective and negotiate with the builder, obviously, and try to get that. So ideally he has. I mean, if you haven't, you want to go to your lawyer right away to look at these issues, but usually buyers should have looked at that ahead of time or should have hired their lawyer ahead of time.
But just to be clear, because Summit mentions that they did not use a buyer agent themselves when they entered into this agreement with the builder. Is the agreement of purchase and sale normally then furnished by the builder's representative?
Yeah, and sometimes what the builders do is they just basically prepare the agreement of purchase and sale, just get the buyer to sign it on the spot. The buyer's excited. And there are cases where the buyer just never got anyone to review it. I mean, and the problem is these builder agreements are like 30 to 40 pages. They're long. They're like very long agreements and very detailed. And like I said, typically they favor the builders significantly. And sometimes there can be clauses in there that leads to a lot of additional charges on closing. And unless you're reading it thoroughly, you could get slammed with a nasty and very big bill at the end of completion with additional charges. So this is why you want to have a lawyer review your agreement, whether it's a condominium or a low-rise home, before kind of accepting and getting into a firm contract with a builder.
And I'm assuming the way Summit's phrasing his question that maybe this hasn't happened, because some of these questions, would likely be something that if the only person you had engaged, the only professional to represent yourself in this transaction, you presumably would have gone to them first with these questions. So there is a chance that maybe our viewer didn't get a real estate lawyer at the time of signing. Yeah. In this case, your advice is to go ahead and acquire one now.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes people do, they just don't want to go to the lawyer because, I mean, every question you ask your lawyer, they're billing you whatever, a few $100 an hour or whatever it is. But you want to pay that and you want to get the best advice possible in these situations.
I also have to laugh because you keep saying your lawyer. I'm not sure all of us have lawyers. A lot of us consumers just acquire a real estate lawyer for the purposes of making a couple transactions in our lifetime. So fair. I'm not sure all of us have a call Saul on our Rolodex, but your point is that a real estate lawyer should be retained to look at this agreement, number one. Number two, and maybe this is more for the lawyer themselves to answer, it seems like Summit's also asking, is there a difference whether something is just in a floor plan versus written into the APS? But I guess if the APS is constructed by the builders themselves, they probably negotiated some leeway, even in the agreement of purchase and sale. So it looks like it's a more solid thing that they mentioned in the APS. But if they've drafted it, and it's a long document, as you said,
Yeah, and listen, they're going to put in that, on delivery, they're going to promise certain finishes, certain quality, and they cannot substitute them with something completely different. Like you cannot get high-end hardwood floors and they say, well, because of supply constraints, we're going to install vinyl tiles. Like that's not, generally going to fly. So, but they do have flexibility in making some reasonable substitutions. But again, I think in this case, talk to the lawyer, ideally, who reviewed the agreement of purchase and sale to look at, what remedy, if there is any, if there is a material change in what was promised versus what was delivered. And that's what you're looking for, like a significant difference, not
And
just like a substitute.
and if Summit did not retain a lawyer at the time of signing this agreement, could they go ahead and retain a lawyer
Yeah,
now?
absolutely. Yeah, you'd want to do that right away, actually, especially with some of these additional questions that we have.
All right, so let's move on to the second part.
Yeah, and the second part was this question about viewing the unit prior to completion. And I think he said that in the agreement of purchase and sale, it says that he has the right to view the unit before taking occupancy, which to me would sounds like an odd clause. Like normally you do not have the flexibility to do that. Like if you just think about it from safety perspective, these homes are construction sites, right, before completion, and they don't want an average person to go there and get injured. Like if you're viewing it while it's under construction, like it's just completely different consideration. So that seems odd to me. But if he said it is in as an agreement of purchase and sale that is a right to do that, again, this would be a situation where you would want to get your lawyer to review that. And if the builder is refusing it, then your lawyer would need to effectively argue on your behalf as to why this is your right based on a certain clause in the agreement, right? Unless you want to do that yourself, right? But if it is in the agreement, I mean, you in theory should have the rights to do that. But again, that does sound a bit unique and not very typical, I'd say.
Is
and
it
the
possible that a builder, again, because they've drafted the APS, could they be including these kind of things to reassure people? Like, you do have a chance to visit before even your final inspection. How tilted can these APSs be?
I mean, like I said, they're very tilted towards the builder, and maybe there is some clause that says they're allowed to visit before the pre-delivery, but maybe at a certain point in the construction cycle. And I don't know what that would be. Like obviously at a point where, it is safe and there aren't holes in the floor and stuff like that, right?
Right. And to your original point, there's a lot of fine print. You said that these agreements can be how long?
Well, yeah, like 30 plus pages sometimes.
So
They're
they
long.
define what's safe.
Yeah.
And that might not be apparent to the consumer.
Yeah.
And there may be reasons for that because they may also want to present the product at a certain stage.
Yeah.
So it seems like there could be a lot of details in there as well.
For sure. Yeah. And now the last question, of course, is this concern about the builder selling units for less than what Sumit paid for it. And just this concern that when he's about to take possession, the appraisal is going to come in less than what he paid for the unit. And just so everyone understands what the issue is here, if Sumit paid $1 million for the condo, and all of a sudden the builder is selling units for 800,000. Well, when Sumit goes to get a mortgage on closing, there's this risk that when the bank looks at it and says, okay, you paid $1 million, but I don't really care because it's only worth 800. So I'm going to give you a mortgage based on 800, which means you need a 20% down payment, which is 160,000. And then we're going to give you a mortgage of 80% on a valuation of 800,000. Which means he has to cover the difference between the $1 million he paid for it and the 800,000 that it's worth. So basically an extra 200,000 he has to have in cash, right? And obviously that is not possible for most people to just come up with that much cash. And this is an important consideration and concern. So, and this is a situation that a lot of pre-construction buyers are finding themselves. If we've seen sort of those news articles about people picketing and protesting at builders' offices, across the Toronto area, this is effectively what they're protesting, that, they paid a certain price, prices are down, and they can't close on the properties that they bought. So, one thing to do is just be proactive and talk to your mortgage broker about, about the financing, especially if it's coming up in the next few months. Obviously I probably wouldn't be, raising the alarm bells myself and telling my bank that, because the lender doesn't necessarily know what the builder is selling other units for, right? When a bank appraiser is doing an appraisal, they're comparing it against existing resale units, right? They're not necessarily, usually they don't. They usually don't look at what the builder is selling for. They might have that information, but usually they're looking at comparable resale units. But more importantly, they want to talk to their lender to see what the lender is going to do, because some lenders are not going to do an appraisal before closing. Some lenders might just say, listen, you paid $1 million for it, that's fine, we'll honor the financing commitment or whatever, and they'll give them a mortgage based on that. If the bank is going to do an appraisal before closing, then you want to be proactive and understand what that would look like and what the risks are, especially if the $150,000 deposit was his entire savings, right? Because then there's no more money left to cover any difference between the purchase price and the appraisal value. And I've seen buyers in these situations, like 100% the situation where that exact situation happened and the value fell and they couldn't cover the difference. So, I think it's important to be proactive and understand sort of what your lender is going to do. Are they going to do an appraisal? What are they looking at? To be proactive and try to mitigate these risks. You don't want to leave it till the last minute.
All right. So hopefully that's helpful. I guess talk to your real estate lawyer right away and then your mortgage broker right away.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. I hope that helps. I feel for people. They're in difficult situations right now because of the sudden movement of the market. Question 2. Hi, John. I've been watching your YouTube videos and I find them so informative. Here's my situation. I bought my first townhouse, in Ottawa in February 2022 for $731,000. It was originally listed at $629,000, and my realtor advised me to offer $740,000 on it because I was competing with multiple offers. I ended up offering $731,000, so about $10,000 less, with a 20% down payment, and I ended up winning the bidding war. Ever since then, prices in the area have dropped, and I've seen the same kind of home recently sell for $600,000. I'm now wondering what options I have. Should I stay with the home for the long term? I have a variable mortgage at prime -1, and I'm able to make my mortgage payments so far, and I'm hoping rates will come down in the near future. But all of this has caused me a lot of anxiety and sadness. What would you do if you're in my situation? Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. Thanks, Sachin. Again, I really feel for buyers in this position right now.
Yeah, I mean, a very stressful situation, of course, because this purchase generally happened at very close to, I'd say, the peak of the market. I mean, I don't follow Ottawa very closely, but I'm sure it's very similar to Toronto. In February was when the market generally started to cool down. We saw the first signs of it here in late February as the Bank of Canada started raising rates. And, we saw prices drop about 20%, which is quite frankly very in line with this decline from 731 to 600 is close to 20%. So a lot of very good questions. I mean, before I try to tackle what I would do, I think the first thing to just comment on is about, paying whatever it was, 100 and something over 1,000 over asking because the realtor told him to pay a certain price. I mean, listen, I think one of the most important things, I think, if anyone can kind of get from some of these shows and some of the courses I do online, is that you never want to offer what your realtor tells you to offer, right? I think your first question as a buyer is, what's the property worth, right? Like you need to understand this. It's critical. You need to do like your agent needs to do a comparative analysis, say, this home that's listed for 629 is really worth this price, right? And perhaps, I don't know if, and I can tell you from experience, most agents don't do this. Most agents just look at the home and say, you need to offer 100,000 over, without really giving any justifiable reason as to why a buyer should offer this price, without comparables. Like, comparables are critical when you're buying a home, because the comparables tell you this is what 3 similar homes sold for. This is what this property in theory should be worth, right?
And does this echo what you said in the last answer to the last person? It's a look at resale homes, similar resale homes,
exactly.
and seeing what the value is within a certain time range, I'm assuming?
Yeah, usually within the past 4 months or so. You got to be more careful when, like, you couldn't do 4 months last spring because prices were falling like $100,000 a month. So you needed very timely comparables. But generally over the past 3-4 months, you want to look at what has sold. And what happens is you get a value range. So this house is listed for 629. Maybe the realtor says it's worth 710 to 725 or something like that, right? Now, what a buyer decides to offer is 100% up to them. I mean, I've had clients who overpay, you know what I mean? And they, sometimes it makes me uneasy when people pay a premium, but in those situations, they're informed, they know what they're doing, they've seen the comparables, they don't care. They just want the home, they want to win it, they're fine paying a premium, it's a unique home, whatever. That is different than blindly overpaying because no one gave you the right information. So I think that's the first important thing I think buyers should understand when they're competing in bidding wars. Every good agent should be giving you comparables when you're bidding on a home, whether it's a one-on-one negotiation where a home's taking offers anytime and you're not in a bidding war. And especially if it's in a bidding war, you need to know what max price is reasonable. Like, one of our agents just called me today because her clients, effectively could have won a home. Like, the home had multiple offers and the seller's agent effectively gave our agent and our client kind of the first right of refusal and said, listen, we want you guys to win it if you can come up to this price, right? And that happens a lot of times because when we submit offers, we don't just email an offer, we build rapport with the agent, we call the agent. Good agents want to work with other good professional agents, right? So when you build rapport, when you build a connection, you tell a story about your client. Sometimes when 2 offers are close, the listing agent will bias the agent who just comes off as more professional versus the agent who just emails an offer, doesn't say anything about the clients, and never picks up the phone to call. You know what I mean?
And why is that? Is there sometimes a fear that maybe the buyer won't show up with the deposit check?
Yeah, exactly. They won't.
This isn't really a done deal if you go with somebody that doesn't seem to know what they're doing.
It's all of those things. It's like confidence, right? Like, if one agent just emailed an offer, you don't know if they have a bank draft because they didn't include it, they didn't mention it, they didn't call you. Whereas the other agent says, we've got it, my clients are renting, they don't need to sell, they're fully pre-approved up to this point, I've got a bank draft, I'll deliver it to you in an hour. Who do you want to work with? Right? Like, it's obvious. Like, you want to work with the person who's on the ball, will deliver the deposit, has called you, versus chasing some other agent who just has never picked up the phone, right? So, in this situation, they had the option of getting it, but our agent was just concerned about the price that the sellers wanted, right? Or were expecting, the price that some other buyer was willing to pay. And in the end, our clients had the option. They were being conservative in the valuation, and they decided not to go that high, so they didn't get it, right? But to me, it's more important to, potentially walk away from a sale if that means accepting it puts our client at risk, right? Of the appraisal not coming in. So it doesn't matter that we didn't get it. If the point is, if getting it puts them at considerable risk, that may not be one that we want to win, right? So, I think that's a very important factor when you're a buyer and you're in these situations, that you want some advice and you want someone telling you how high might be too high, right? And when the appraisal becomes a risk, and we don't know 100%, like, we don't know what an appraiser is going to say. But there are periods when we are very confident based on the comparables. And in this situation, our agent's like, it wasn't as clear. The comparables weren't cut and dry. Like, yes, they could justify this price, but you could see how an appraiser could pick certain other comparables and come in with a lower valuation. It wasn't like a cookie cutter situation. And I think that's why they wanted to be conservative. So anyways, I think I mean, I went off on a tangent on the question, but to me, that's the most important thing when you're in a market like this and you're competing. You need that advice. And if your agent isn't giving that to you, then, you know, you want to find an agent who's kind of advising you, because that's really what they're getting paid for. They're not getting paid to open up lock boxes. I mean, anyone can open up a lockbox. Going back to the question, Sachin's question. So bought for 731, now at 600. Wondering what options there are.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is, Sachin asks, do I stay for the long term? So I guess the question is, we don't actually know what the actual value of this house is. There could be two things going on. There could be a situation in which this buyer is overpaid. And in addition to that, we're seeing the rapidly falling sale prices, which we've seen across the market.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't know all the details. And now with respect to the question about, you know, should he stay for the long term? What options are there? I mean, it's very hard for me. I can only speak from what I would do, because obviously these situations are highly personal. I mean, and to me, the most important thing when you read this was, you know, can you afford the payments? You know, I think one of the comments was, I'm paying variable prime -1 and I can afford the payments for now, but, you know, is this concern that rates or payments might increase? So to me, this is the first and most important consideration. Can you make the payments over the next 2-3 years? And especially, you know, 2-3 years when you need to renew, you know, banks have already said that they're working with clients, extending amortizations. But I think the first important thing is making sure you can make the payments, right? Like, we don't want to be in a situation where we're, you know, pressured to sell or forced to sell because we can't make our mortgage payments. The second question, of course, is there any reason why Sachin needs to sell or move, or a life change or whatever? Obviously, that is another reason. But I'll speak from my personal opinion. Again, take it with a grain of salt. Even if I needed to move, okay, even if I was in the situation, prices fell and I needed to move, I needed to relocate my family. For the most part, provided I can make my mortgage payments, there's no chance I would sell the home, because selling the home puts you down $140,000 plus transaction costs. Like, and that assumes you actually made that big of a down payment. Like, if Sachin only put down 10%, selling isn't an option, because what is owed exceeds his equity. Like, you can't sell. Like, what are you going to do? Declare bankruptcy? Like, the bank's not going to get all their money back. So you don't have a lot of options. I mean, even if you have a huge down payment, it would be very hard for me to walk away from 150,000. Like, quite frankly, if I needed to move and relocate, I would probably just rent the home, and then rent wherever else I'm moving until the market recovers. And even if that's 4 years or 5 years, you know what? Not a lot of people can save 150 grand in 5 years. You know what I mean? And if that's how long it takes for you to recoup that capital, it's worth it, right? So generally, you know, and I appreciate the anxiety and the sadness. I mean, a lot of this is just obviously looking at the price we paid versus what your neighbors are paying now. And there's a very big difference. And, you know, in life, we have to, I think, focus on the things that are within our control, not the things that are without. We cannot beat ourselves up about that, because even, you know, me, in our report, I talked about how the market was slowing down in February. Even though I see it, I had no idea prices were going to fall 20% in 4 or 5 months. Nobody did. Like, that type of rapid decline, these things aren't predictable, right? And the fact is that the market overreacted to price declines. It wasn't just rate, it was like panic, because now prices are stable, and prices, at least in Toronto, are actually trending up, right? Despite the much higher rate. So it was a very behavioral shock. So we can't, you know, feel guilty for buying in a moment where we didn't know where the market was going. You know, I think we focused on controlling the things that are within our control, and that is ensuring we can make our mortgage payments. And if we have to move, rent it, you know, rent it out. Like, that is a way of controlling your losses, quite frankly. And mitigating any losses by just holding on to the home. And again, part of this is a bias. I don't want to say bullish. I'm bullish real estate long term. Like, I'm very confident that the longer term trend for house prices will be one of rising prices versus declining prices over the next 5 years. So I'm not saying in 5 years prices will get back exactly to where Sachin bought, but at least close. Even if you make 100 grand in 3-4 years, that's not a small sum of money to see that gain in your home's value. So that's generally what I would do.
And do you base that, John, on your observation that unlike some other places where this has happened, where there's, let's say, been a really fast expansion of supply, and this is a bit different. It does look like in the medium to long term, the Toronto area will retain, including other parts of Ontario, will retain their popularity.
Yeah, I mean, generally, yeah, because I think the underlying dynamics of Canada's population boom continuing are going to be there. And this is creating a tremendous pressure on housing during a period where supply isn't accelerating. And I'm honest, we're seeing it on the ground right now, like April 2023. It's insane. There are bidding wars. It is competitive. Like, it's starting to feel like there's this fear of missing out again. And it's just because people need homes and there just aren't enough of them, right?
Well, I recall seeing that after the 2008 slowdown and then COVID, the prices shot back up. I think what you're talking about is, as Canada seeks to bolster its falling natural population rate through immigration and other methods, there will be this influx and this demand. And so far that we're seeing Canada as being one of those countries that is using this strategy, has to, for many reasons economically. And so that's why you're not the only expert saying medium to long term, there's a decent chance. So I guess the question is, if you can hang on, do everything you can hang on in the short term. And I hope you can, Sachin, and I hope that helps.
And really, I mean, like I said, I think the key thing is like trying to not sweat and not feel bad about buying when we did or when some people did, given that price fell, because you cannot, these were unpredictable events. You know what I mean?
Let's go further, John. Wasn't there an assurance by a certain governor from a certain Bank of Canada that interest rates would not increase? And one of the biggest,
I think.
Yeah, and then what in 2024? Until 2024,
I think he said, yeah.
Governor Macklem said that, and because, in addition to, you just said that you didn't see this rapid price decrease. Well, one thing that economists didn't see is how long the inflation would last coming out of COVID. And that was then due to confounding factors like the war on Ukraine and other issues. And so it just seemed like the runaway inflation is not necessarily sustained. Runaway high inflation was not a story most people predicted. I remember the word transient being used 100%. A lot.
Yeah.
So, sure. I think it is important not to blame ourselves too much. You make a good decision in the time. And I really do think this is a situation, people love to say, well, the people, consumers, if you ever see the media stories, they should have known better. This is not quite one of those situations. Yeah. This was a situation in which very authoritative figures went out and said, hey, things are going to be low interest rate for a while. So
exactly.
Unfortunately, economic realities took over. High interest rates we saw in the last I guess year and over a year now, one of the most rapid interest rate cycle hikes, and that's the result. So I agree with you, not to maybe dwell on that and see what you can do to protect yourself.
Yeah.
All right. Hopefully that helps. And let's finish with our question 3. So, hi, John. I would like to get advice from you for my current situation. I'm debating between upgrading my family home or buying an investment property to fund my retirement in 20 years. Thank you, Kim.
Again, I mean, these are tricky because they're very personal. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer. I think the first and most important thing is to think about, are you happy in your home that you're living in now? Can you stay in that home over the long term until your retirement? And And if not, if it's too small or you feel that you're making too many compromises, I mean, then you'd need to upsize. You know what I mean? And I think to me, this is the most important consideration. I mean, you need to live a good life and a rich life, and I'm not suggesting people max out and buy the biggest home. I mean, I wouldn't do that, but you know, you need a home that meets your needs, right? And especially if someone's at a place where their family is growing and the current home's a bit too tight, you know, I think it's important to think about the longer term things that you need in a home, and whether your existing home fits that, right? And you know, if it doesn't, then of course that's leaning you towards buying another home, right? If it does, yeah, then maybe you can keep your current home and buy, you know, perhaps an investment condo, which is usually what most people do. But I think to expand on that even further, I don't even necessarily think it is like, I don't even think it's like one or the other. You know, if you have, for example, a million, let's just keep things simple. If you have $1 million home, right, and you're contemplating upgrading to a $1.5 million home, right, or keeping your current $1 million home and buying a $500,000 condo, right? At the end of the day, you're still going to have $1.5 million in real estate. Okay. Like, just to keep the number simple. Well, if you're upgrading to, and most people just think of one as consumption and the other one while planning for my retirement. But at the end of the day, if you're upgrading to the $1.5 million home, I mean, you still have a $1.5 million home that is appreciating with the market. If it's a low-rise home, it's probably going to even appreciate a little bit faster than condos. So you still have a home that is part of your retirement portfolio, right? The only difference is you're not getting any rental income on that $500,000 you spent, right? So that part you're paying out of pocket for consumption to own a nicer home. You're not getting the rental income, but you still have that extra $500,000 as an investment in your portfolio. So when it comes down to downsize 20 years from now, you still have that capital, and maybe you've paid it off and can downsize to a smaller home and buy an investment condo in cash at that point, right? So it's not like always just one or the other. Upgrading still might, you know, fit some of their longer term goals if they eventually want to downsize in the future and take some of that capital and invest broadly. And I actually just met with someone recently who's kind of doing something very similar. Like, they own a home, downsizing to a smaller condo, and have enough money to potentially buy another investment property because they don't need as big of a home. It's just one person. They're downsizing, you know, from a detached home. So again, that's another example of someone who just didn't necessarily plan to be an investor, but in theory could do that if they want to, you know, buy their, you know, 1+10 or 2-bedroom condo themselves, and whatever money is left over, buy a rental property in cash, and they have that additional income. You know, that's, you know, an option for them as well. So you don't always necessarily have to do it from today, you know, and effectively you're making compromises either way. If you buy the investment condo today, you're kind of compromising on your home. You got a smaller home, it's a little bit tighter. You're not, you know, you don't have maybe the same type of living environment. On the flip side, if you upsize, the compromise you're making is your cash expenses are higher per month because you've taken on an extra $500,000 in debt in theory, and you don't have that rental income, right? So either way, there's compromise. It's just figuring out which compromise is the right one based on, you know, personal circumstances and, you know, goals for the next 10 years.
That was a neat way of looking at a very open-ended question. Thanks, John. Hopefully that was helpful, Kim. So that is our show for today. We often get other questions. We will fit more questions in our next episode, and we welcome you again to keep them coming. Your questions. Ask John at movesmartly.com. Thanks you
everyone.
again.
Till next month.
And we'll talk to you next month. Thanks.